Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Videomail for the week of October 10th, 2011. Welcome to the site, to the new members. Welcome back to the old. The Ask Videomail is your chance to get your question in character animation or performance answered in a video just like this one. But I need to have your questions if I'm going to answer them in a video, so please send them my way. The address to send them to is webmaster@kennyroy.com. I go through all the questions and answer the ones that I hope will help the most people in learning animation. This week is a great question, and I want to talk just a little bit about the question, preface it just a little bit. There are a lot of technical things, there's a lot of technical problems that we're going to run into when we're learning 3D animation. And they can be super frustrating. I want to encourage you guys to send every question that you have. Don't struggle for longer than 5 minutes. We're here at my studio right now. We're here at Arconics in LA, and I have like a rule, which is if you struggle with something, you just can't get past it for longer than 5 minutes, then you should have asked. And I pretty much, enforce that rule with an iron fist around here, because there's no reason to be struggling on your own when there's a wealth of knowledge around you at your fingertips. Not just me here on the site, but also in forums, or if you're working at a studio, the people around you. So don't struggle, don't fight, get help. And this is a great question that will, if you've never thought about this question, or you are struggling with this issue right now in production even, this is a question that will really help, I think, a lot of people, which is why I chose it for this week's video mail, which is really cool. So that's the preface for the question. A few announcements. Don't forget CTN, Creative Talent Network Expo is coming up. It's going to be in Burbank, November 18th, 19th, and 20th. Very exciting time, and I will be there handing out a promo code. It's a promo code that you can use even if you're a member already. All you have to do is just re-sign up with the promo code. Just put your same username in and check yes where it asks you if this is a renewal, and it'll give you the 30 days free. So I just wanted to, a big thank you to everybody for going for a year. I launched at CTN Expo last year, so it's almost exactly 1 year ago that we started, and I'm just getting excited to go to the expo, see everybody, hang out, and talk. And so if you're in the area and you can make it, you should definitely come out. It's a lot of fun. Okay, let's now get to the question. This week's Ask Video question is... All right, so as you can see, very good question in terms of the amount that you'll encounter this on the job. So most rigs have a main cog. We'll call the cog the root, okay, which controls pretty much the entire upper body. Okay, it's a translation and rotation controller for the entire upper body. Now the master control is that thing on the ground that allows you to roughly place your control, or your character rather. You should never do animation with the master controller, unless of course you're doing some sort of cycle which you've already worked out the stride length and you want to kind of just like roughly block somebody in. But for the most part, I don't encounter many instances where animating the master controller is worthwhile. So we're talking about the difference between animating the first joint in the spine versus the root or the cog. Okay, so let's take a look at Bloke here. And like most rigs, he has, this is the root. It's a translate, okay, and a rotate. And he also has a pelvis control. Now this pelvic control right now controls only his hips, all right? However, if you wanted to select the entire spine, you could actually get the same kind of movement out of, or posing rather, out of using these controllers as you would using the root control. Okay? Now, the thing about bloke is that his spine doesn't have a switch on it. Okay? Or at least I don't think it does. Let me see. Yeah. It doesn't have a switch on it. A lot of other rigs do have a switch where you can go from FK to an IK spine. And so here's kind of your rule of thumb. When you are creating your poses have a line of action. And a lot of times, if you're kind of thinking of your line of action in 3D space, that line of action kind of goes down the center line. The rule of thumb is your cog should be lined up with that center line of that line of action. Okay? Where the line of action goes through the cog. Meaning, let's kind of like imagine we're drawing on this. Actually, you know what? I'll just open up Annotate, and we can do that. I just got a license of Annotate Pro, so just for exactly this reason. All right, here we go. So now we're drawing. Okay, cool. So let's come up with a pose where he's kind of like Superman, like kind of lifting off the ground. You know, kind of like this. And one knee is up, and the other one's down, like kind of like pushing off like this. Okay. All right. Now the line of action here is kind of through the middle, just like that, isn't it? Okay. So let's just quickly pose him kind of like this. All right. So we're going to make his root line up with that line of action where it. So we need the spine, you know, obviously to take on a pose, and this is fine. But what you're not seeing me do is all of a sudden start to rotate these spine controls to try to get him into a position that is dictated by this line of action, right? Oops. You can tell that this is obviously the first time I've used Annotate. It looks like I can move the actual pieces around. Please forgive me for I just need to be a little more careful. Okay. Like this. Okay. So I didn't get the proportions quite right. But here we have our pose. Okay? And I would be happy with this because I know that I haven't counter animated the rotations or the translations of my guy's body where they're not supposed to be. And this guy has a full full IK spine where you can actually make adjustments in the spine. It looks like though that these two middle controls are actually parented or constrained in between. See, can you imagine look how ugly this looks. See, now we're getting into the territory where you're going to get into a lot of trouble using these spine controls for a lot more than they're supposed to be used in this rig. Okay, so let's do one more pose. Okay, let me erase everything. Let's have him kind of like rearing up. Okay, about to like go off and take a big step like to his left. Okay, so his arms like this, and his head's way over here, and his other arm is kind of curled up like this, and straight underneath him, kind of like that. Okay, all right, so let's pose him like this. So again, actually, let me draw the center line again now. So again, the center line though, for this one, his hips are kind of turned a little bit to the left. All right, and tilted up. So we kind of need a center line that reflects that, or a line of action, sorry, that reflects that center line. That was good. Ooh, that was even better. Okay, great. So we lucked out. All right, so let's go back and pose him thusly. So as you can see, we're going to line up, and sometimes or I would say most of the time, it does mean that the hips are kind of all lined up. It doesn't always mean that the hips are all lined up. See here, I want him like rotated just a little bit over here, and then I'm going to rotate it to camera actually to get the rest of that spine bend. Okay. See what we're doing here? We're going just kind of very calmly to a point where the controls don't feel a lot of stress. You can also say that when your controls start looking like they are stressing out, in other words, they're getting to a point where all the motions that you're doing with them look like they are pulling against another control, then you're in trouble, okay? So for instance, these center controls right here, obviously they are meant to be shapers. They're meant to be moved around. They can also rotate. They're kind of like a hybrid FKIK. But if you move this down here and then moved this one back here, then obviously these are fighting against each other. And I'm not even sure what would happen if I rotate right here. Okay, see, look. So that center point, when you start rotating it, see how it's rotating around its own pivot, not in the center of the spine. So you've lost your pivot point by making that adjustment. Okay? His legs are always a lot shorter than I draw them, aren't they? Anyway, well, I want this big rear up, so. Anyway. So there we go. So this is absolutely definitely the way that I would make this post. So let me set a key right here, and then on this frame, I'll show you like what not to do. So this would be with the root positioned straight forward without any adjustment on it, okay? So that's a problem because we're going to end up with a lot of counter animation and counter posing, I guess is more accurate, on the pelvis here. And now the spine, and we're having to do translation and rotation on the spine in order to get the same motion, or sorry, same pose that I just had, okay? So now what you can see is that on this frame, you have the hips are out of line of the root, okay? Now, why is that a problem? Well, here's why it's a problem. Because the root can account for world space, meaning you know that if you rotate this in Y, okay, like this, I'm just using the Y channel, that it's spinning like a top, right? But the hips here, if I rotate this in Y, it's in its own object space. It's underneath the root, and that's a problem. Why? Because if you wanted to do, let's say you wanted to continue this animation and do like a full turn, where the foot comes down over here, and the body kind of steps into it. So it turns and steps into it, you know, boom, like that. Steps into that foot, right? Well, that's fine and all, but all of a sudden, guess what you have? Let's say you want your character to continue moving forward in the object Z space. Let's go to the graph editor and look at translate Z. Well, I guess that's what he's doing, but let's see everything else. Oh my gosh. Here you have it. Translate X, Y, and Z all have these crazy values on them, okay? It's not just forward in Z. That's not what we're actually getting. In fact, if you watch, I know it's a little hard to see with the resolution of this video, but if you watch me just moving this, it's actually moving according to the object space of the root controller. So very quickly, once you, I call it stepping out, once you step out of that cog, you're creating animation that is going to be absolutely, completely uneditable in your graph editor. And anyone who knows about production knows that you need to be able to make pretty much really thoughtful decisions using like only your graph editor a lot of times in production. You need to be able to hunt down problems, okay? So just think about it this way. If you wanted to do this turn with the cog or with the root, you'd be able to do it in world space, and he could step into that, that foot as it places, and everything would be fine, right? What you are doing by animating the hips too much is switching object spaces right in the middle of your animation when you don't need to. But you'll notice that a lot of rigs that you encounter also break once you start going outside normal ranges for the pelvis, for instance. So the biggest rule of thumb is that you should always rotate the body so that the root or cog is in line with the center line as depicted by the line of action for that pose. And then use all of the controls that are underneath the cog as positioners and posing tools, not moving tools. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So as your character moves through the scene, as they take a 90-degree turn, and this is especially difficult with quadrupeds because a lot of controls on quads have a hips and a chest underneath a main controller. On Nico, the last month's lecture is the quick quad walk. I hope you've all checked it out. On Nico, that quad rig, the back control actually is the parent of the chest as well, which makes it easy for doing kind of like overlap on those steps, which is nice. But I've seen just as many quadruped rigs that have a master controller and then hips and chest that behave kind of like the pelvis of Bloke here. And that's kind of hard too. When your character takes a turn, how do you know where, should I rotate the cog halfway through? You have your answer. The pivot point of the cog or the root should be lined up with the character. So like here you go. So if you have a quad, here's top view. Here's the head. Here's the shoulders. Okay, the spine. And here's the hips. Okay. And if they're going to take a turn, okay, new color. All right. And let's say here's the head. Here's the chest. And here's the hips. Okay. And this is top view rather. If the pivot point for your control, that is the parent of both the hips and the chest, is right here in the middle, then you have your answer right here. You want something that's perpendicular to the tangent of that curve. So here is basically, it has to point basically halfway the angle between the chest and the hips, right? However, let's use yet another color here. Let's try green. Okay. Yet, if the pivot is back here, like it is for Nico, it's not really showing up too well. Let's try blue. If the pivot is back here, like it is for Nico, right, then same thing. You'll find that you're using the hips rotation very little on a rig like this, right? And your spine should be pointing this way, but you've posed it, look, these are controls, you've posed it to be over here to take this turn. And then as the body goes around the turn and maybe he straightens out, this is the rotation basically of your hips. And while your hips are back here and your chest, I'm loving changing colors here, your chest is up top. Let's go back to yellow. Your chest is up top, right? So this is the current position of your spine. You're going to have to pose your chest accordingly. Your chest is going to have to straighten out. While your chest is up here, your hips are back here. So your hips are just finally straightening out. So your chest are going to have to lead that action. It's going to have to steer it around the turn, okay? So I've seen this before. I've seen rigs that have like a control right here, like right in the middle of a rig like this. I've seen students, like if the character's starting to take a turn, just just translate the cog around. Just use the cog for translation, like from top view, and doing all of the rotation with the hips and the chest, and making a huge mess of their scene. This is super important, and it's really valuable to know. So thank you for this great question. So just to summarize, you should always know the line of action of all your poses. Even on really super physical actions, you do need to know where that master control is sitting and where its pivot is. It should always be basically dictating the overall motion and orientation of your character at all times. And then counterpose and position all of the controls underneath that master control to make the pose that you want, to get the silhouette, to get the line of action, to get everything, all of the fundamentals into your character's movement. Okay, that's a very good question. If you have any problems, you should probably submit them to the forums. Show off what you're doing. Like, hey, I'm doing a 180 turn with this character, and this is what I've got. Anyone have any ideas? I'm sure everyone would love to see and would love to help. Okay, very good question. Please send in more. I love questions. Please send your questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. No question is dumb. I read them all, I promise, and I'm very excited to be almost 1 year down here on kennyroy.com. So thank you for supporting the site, and tell your friends. Good luck with your animation, and as always, rock on.